Explain like I'm 5. How did propeller warplanes shoot their machine guns through the propeller? Oh, this is actually very cool. They would time the gun to a cam on the propeller axle. There was a little bump on the axle that would push the mechanism to fire the gun. But it was placed on the axle in a place that it would only push when the propeller was out of the way of the gun. This technique is used very often still in modern engines to time things properly. This also kinda meant firing rate was dependent on the speed of the propeller turning. This became possible after the invention and implementation of the interrupter gear, also called a sync gear. It timed the machine gun rate of fire with the propeller so that it did not fire bullets when the propeller blade was directly in front of the barrel of the gun. It was called a Fokker interrupter gear, and it synchronized the firing of the gun with the passing of the propeller blade. When the trigger was squeezed, bullets would only be fired when they would pass between the blades. Very carefully, they used a mechanism that synchronized the machine gun's rate of fire with the revolutions of the helix so it could shoot through without destroying it. It was called a Fokker interrupter gear, and it synchronized the firing of the gun with the passing of the propeller blade. When the trigger was squeezed, bullets would only be fired when they would pass between the blades. Long story short, the propeller engine crankshaft was actually pulling the trigger, and the pilot's trigger was just an on-off like a safety. Others have mentioned the German solution of using a complex timing gear. But we need to acknowledge the mad genius of the French solution: build an engine with a gap through the middle, and into said gap slot a light artillery piece. Why? No idea. But I have a feeling someone in the French Air Corps planned to go tank hunting. Or possibly got offended by the idea that planes didn't explode when shot and wanted to change that. I was gonna try to be funny and say they timed them to shoot between the propeller blades, but it looks like that's the actual answer XD. I was at the Boeing Museum of Flight the other day and wondered. I may have missed any explanation. So I'm glad to read this. Thank you. Oftentimes it's the same reason any engine works. A timing belt makes sure everything happens at specific intervals. In your car, the timing belt makes sure the pistons and valves are extending out at alternating times. And if your timing belt snaps, a valve and a piston will become besties and your engine will likely be irreparable. So the gun and the propeller are mechanically connected via a belt, gears, etc., so that the gun will not work if a propeller is in front of it. So if properly set up, the gun physically cannot fire when a propeller will intersect it. The gun is mechanically tied to the propeller with a gear. It cannot fire until it's between propellers. I don't know anything about it, but I know my old boss's grandfather was part of the team that developed the system. At first they didn't. Your co-pilot and theirs would exchange fire, or the pilot would have a revolver. Then when Lewis guns were mounted, they just armored the propeller and the pilot would just have to hope they didn't get hit by an unfortunate rebound. Then later on, timing gear was developed so you could only fire between the gaps.